Welcome to Friday Night at the FRIGHTS. I am your host, Lord Byron. I'm glad to be back. Been ill, and thank you for your patience. It's not easy being ill when you're dead. So continue on with the annual tradition. We've been reading from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, a collection of folklore retold by Alvin Schwartz. I know Alvin Schwartz. And drawings by Stephen Gamel, or Gamel. However he pronounces his name, it's up to him. It's his name, right? So, the story starts off. Turn down the lights and listen very softly. For we'll be talking about the haunted house. Many haunted houses I have been in, they aren't very pleasant. Tell you that. One time a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest in his settlement, meaning exorcise him and pass him on to the other side. The house had been painted for about 10 hours. Haunted, pardon me, for 10 hours. Who would want to paint a house for 10 hours? Come on. It was haunted for 10 hours. The ghost didn't want to paint it for 10 hours. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they would always get scared out. They get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went into the house. He went on in, built himself a good fire. You never want to build a bad fire in a haunted house. It never works out. But just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth, back and forth. Sounded like my grandpa when he had gas. You go, blah, blah. It sounded like somebody was trying to scream and get choked off. Yes, that was definitely my grandpa. And then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling. And finally, everything got quiet. And then you heard a loud he was finally relieved. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn. And when the doorknob began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" You never ask, "What do you want?" Don't you know the rules to the scary movies? Never ask, "What do you want?" The door shut back easily like. There wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little. But he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book down on a chair and went to mending to the fire. Poke, poke, scream. Went the fireplace poker. Then the haunt started walking again, and step, step, step up the stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door. He saw the doorknob turn and the door opened. It looked like a young woman. He said, "Oh," he was pretty delighted to see a young woman. And backed up and said, "Who are you?" Rule number 2, never ask that question. "What do you want?" He broke rule number 1 again. Find the page. This is what the young woman looked like, if you could see her. We tried to shine some light on it. Hollowed out eyes she had. The haunt sort of swayed, like she didn't know what to do. And then she faded out, like today's politicians. The old preacher waited and waited. Then he didn't hear any more noises. He went over to shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over. But he was a brave man, a preacher, after all, a man of the cloth. He thought that he had been able to see it through. He turned his chair where he could watch and sat down and waited. It wasn't long before I heard the haunt start up again, slowly. Step, step, step. Closer it came, and closer. Step, step. And it was right at the door. She must be selling Girl Scout cookies. The preacher stood up and held his Bible and went before him. The knob slowly turned and the door opened wide. Would you like to buy some cookies? Heck no, said the preacher. This time the preacher spoke quite alike. He said, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you, and what do you want? The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, took him by his coat. It was a young woman, about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled. The flesh was dripping off her face. Sounds like last Friday's date. She said she could see through the bones and the parts of her teeth. She needed to see a dentist pronto or a prosthodontist. She had no eyeballs, so she needs to see an eye doctor too. But there was sort of a blue light in the back, way back in her eye sockets. A blue light special on eyes in aisle 6. Blue light special on eyes, aisle 6. And they had no nose on her face. So snot was running all over. I had a frozen snot mustache. She started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing through it, kind of a there is no life in the void, only death. She told how her lover had killed her for the money she had buried in the cellar. And he said to the preacher, will you dig it up, her bones, and bury her properly where she could rest? She told him to take the end joint of her little finger of the left hand and lay it in the collection plate the next morning in church. He had found out who had murdered her. He said, if you come back here once more after that, you will hear my voice at midnight, and I will tell you where my money is hid, and you will give it to the church. The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk. I'm sure she stunk too. And she sunk down towards the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones buried beneath the graveyard. Where else would you put the bones? The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone on the collection plate, and there was a certain man that happened to touch it, and it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and grabbed and scraped and tore at the bone, saying, I got a boogie on my finger and I can't get it off. I can't lick it off. I can't pick it off. I sure ain't going to lick it off. I got a bone on my finger and I can't get it off. Then he went screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to murder, and they took him to jail, as they should. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to the house one midnight, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the hearth rock. He did and found a big sack of money where the haunt had held on to his coat. The print of her bony fingers had burned into the cloth. It never did come out because he couldn't find the right cleaner. So the moral of the story is, don't kill anybody. Especially don't do it for their money, because their finger will stick to you in the collection plate at church and your guilt will get to you. Story number 2, the guests. A young man and his wife went on a trip to visit his mother. Usually they arrived in time for supper, but they had gotten a late start and now it was getting dark, so they decided to look for a place to stay overnight and go in the morning. Just off the road they saw a small house in the woods, and maybe they'll rent some rooms, the wife said, so they stopped to ask. An elderly woman and man came to the door. They said they didn't have any rooms. But they said, we would be glad to have you stay overnight as our guests. We have plenty of room. I thought they said they didn't have any rooms, but they have plenty of room. Make up your mind. And they would enjoy their company. The old woman made coffee and brought out some, and the 4 of them talked for a while. Then the young couple were taken to their room and again explained that they wanted to pay for this. But the old man said he would never accept any money. Never. What a nice guy. The young couple got up early the next morning before the host had awoken, and on the table at the front door they left an envelope with money in it. That's very nice of them. And they went on to the next town. They stopped in a restaurant and had the breakfast. You know, your typical pancakes and your eggs and your waffles. Maybe some blueberry syrup with the Rooty Tooty fresh and fruity stuff you put on it. And then you try to dine and dash on the bill. But when the owner was there that had stayed, he was shocked. Pardon me. They stopped at the restaurant and had their fancy breakfast. Went and told the owner where they had stayed, and he was shocked. Oh, that can't be, he said. Blah, blah. The house burned to the ground, and the man and the woman who lived there died in the fire. The young couple couldn't believe it, so they went back to the house. Only now there was no house. All they found was a burned-out shell. They stood staring at the ruins, trying to understand what had happened. The woman screamed. In the rubble was a badly burned out table. Well, yeah, if your house burns down, your table's going to be badly burned too. And there had been the envelope by the door. On the table was the envelope they had left. That's modern then. That's pretty nice. Even in death, they don't take money. Here's another little story. They eat your eyes, they eat your nose, they pick your boogers and they sell your toes. The hearse song. Likes the song I do. Drive a hearse I do. You ever laugh when a hearse goes by, for you may be next to die, and wrap you up in a big white sheet from your head down to your feet. They put you in a big black box, cover you up with dirt and rocks, and then All goes well for about a week. Your coffin begins to leak, the cheap coffins. The worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, the worms eat your eyes, they eat your nose, they eat the jelly between your toes. The big green worms with rolling eyes crawl in your stomach and out your eyes. Your stomach turns a slimy green and pus pours out like whipping cream. You spread it on a slice of bread and you eat it up when you're dead. I prefer tarsals on toast. Maybe meninges and maggots. That will be it for this episode of Friday Night Frights. This is your host, Lord Byron. Have a very, very peaceful night. Sleep. Don't forget to say your prayers, to brush your teeth. Keep a candle burning for safety, for the witching hour is coming. Be careful, my friends. There be haunts about. Not nice, friendly ones like me. No, there be ghoulish ones. Lock your doors. Have a good night. Sleep tight. And I will come to bite. We see you next week for a G.I. Joe toy review, for a spooky G.I. Joe. I know Joe Motions does a good video. Until then, dreadful dreams.